Hello and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Louis Falgout,
I am your other host, Stephen Falgu.
and welcome to episode 14.
Here we are once again, on schedule.
Pretty much. Actually, we are basically on schedule, which, if you guys were not aware, is Mondays, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And that was the schedule for, I guess, the last few episodes, but we didn't exactly stick to it in any way at all.
No, but we're trying. Gonna meet it. We promise. At least for today.
We don't. Yeah, we do not promise. Let's just make that perfectly clear.
We promise that for this current episode that you're listening to.
Yeah, and look at that. We kept our promise.
Man,
It was
we
pretty
are just
tough.
the best.
It was pretty tough to do. So I think we should jump right
Welcome,
into
audience.
it. Do you
This
agree?
is all for you. We did this for you. How did you, Louis? Before we jump into this, how did you
Okay.
celebrate the birth of America?
Well, I gave birth myself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
To a bald eagle?
Actually, it was an owl, but it was supposed to be a bald eagle.
Oh, I hate when that happens.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. You know, like, is it a boy? Is it a girl? Is it a bald eagle? Is it an owl? Like, it's just sometimes.
Yeah, I'm sure the gender reveal was really great. You had all the eagles fly out of the box,
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
but then surprise, it was an owl the whole time.
And George Washington actually attended.
Oh, wow. Did he chop down a cherry tree for you?
You know, I
see.
wasn't paying much attention to the guy because, oddly enough, he likes to kind of hang in the background. You wouldn't think that. But
Yeah, kind of known to be quite extroverted, the life of the party, but instead
yeah,
a real recluse.
It was a big shock, and with that hilarious intro, I think we should get into your rec for
check
me,
that.
Steven.
Check that one off the list. In our, if you're playing bingo at home, you can check off funny goof to begin the episode. And now we're on to the next thing.
Funny goof.
So, there it was. So I recommended to you. But actually, you know what we don't do? We should do this. I'm going to do this for this episode. In case
shit.
this is your first time listening, the premise of the thing you are listening to is that every episode, Louis recommends something for me to watch, listen, whatever the case may be, and I recommend something for him to watch, listen, whatever the case may be, and then we talk about it, give our opinions on whatever it is, and then at the end of this episode, we're going to repeat the cycle.
Yeah, that
So
is indeed the structure of the show.
So that is our show. With that being said, last episode, Louis, I gave you Valerian and the City
Yeah.
of a Thousand Planets.
Yeah.
Luc Besson, right?
Is it? I didn't pay attention.
I'm pretty sure that's his name.
Okay.
He known for The Fifth Element. And that one with Scarlett Johansson, ScarJo, who's in quite a bit of trouble recently. If you've seen,
No.
she is always playing minority roles. Yeah, Lucy, that was it. So Fifth Element and Lucy. Wait, was this a Luc Besson movie? Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway,
Great.
so with that being said, Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, take it away.
Oh, do I have to? Oh. I want everybody to take a look at the poster.
Yes, it was Luc Besson, by the way.
Okay. I want everyone to take a look at the poster, and I want you to look at the two big, bright faces there at the top.
Just our charming main characters.
And I want you to think, man, don't these two leads really help to carry this film?
And if you see Rihanna there, don't worry about that. Pay that no mind.
Yeah. So this film,
if you're like, wow, this movie's called Valerian, and the movie poster's in the shape of a V, you would be correct. That's a good.
yeah.
You did well.
Okay. So the movie opens with a sequence that, as far as I can tell, has no relevance to the rest of the plot at all. They're building the space station, and you're getting these really kind of poor edits, honestly, where a new species or a new race of aliens shows up and shakes the human's hand. And it really has nothing to do with anything. There's even the guy gives a speech about how they're building the space station, and it's so big they have to fly it away from Earth. Well, oh, you know what? The space station, it does end up being the city later in the film. I actually just connected that. That I did not. That is the case. So basically, they build up the space station. It goes off. It's now the city, not the city Valerian, the city of 1,000 planets. Valerian's the fucking Dane DeHaan. I'll mention him. But one thing that I did actually like watching the opening sequence was that there were some practical effects as well as some CG, and everything looked pretty good. The CG, the practical, it all looked pretty good. But then the movie cuts to this race of people who are like pearlescent. And although the CGI is technically very impressive, they were some of the creepiest and just most uncanny things I'd ever seen. If you've ever seen one of those like motion capture CG animated movies, it basically looks like that. And it really freaked me out, and I did not enjoy that sequence. But I don't think it really sunk in how much I was not going to like this movie until the movie hard cuts to Dane DeHaan and this actress. Can you pull up her name? I didn't catch it.
Cara Delevingne.
Cara Delevingne. Dane DeHaan and Cara Delevingne sitting on a bed in the middle of a beach, and it looked awful, and it was disgusting. And Dane DeHaan and Cara Delevingne's dialogue was so absolutely unlikable in every single way. I was like, oh no, why are these our leads? This is awful. And that is basically how I felt about the entire film.
Yeah, the thing to note there, I like that you got to it so quickly, because...
Well, the movie does.
The main characters being so unlikable are really what sells this movie for me, and why it's so bad. Like, I truly cannot describe how much I wanted to punch these characters in the face every time they were on the screen.
Yes.
There are no moments in this film where either of the characters are at all enjoyable, and they are the main focus of the film.
Oh god, and their acting was just ungodly, and it's not even necessarily...
It's like they're both always trying to be smug, and so they always have that kind of like smirked face, like, look at me, how cool I am.
It's so bad. And Dane DeHaan wants Cara Delevingne's character to be his wife. Dane DeHaan is Valerian. And this is kind of the thing. And basically, it results in him going, will you be my wife? And then she says a snarky comment. And that is their dialogue for the entirety of the film. It's truly awful. But I don't think it's the only bad thing in this film. Although it is certainly the worst thing. You know what Valerian really reminded me of, Steven?
What's that?
It reminded me of the Star Wars prequels. And I mean a lot. Like, I'm kind of surprised that George Lucas didn't direct this.
Yeah.
And
I can totally see that.
And I don't just mean that in the fact that I don't like the main characters or anything like that. I just mean that in terms of the world building of this film, where every new location, whether it's creative or not, it feels so stupid and just gross, and like it was made to be in a cartoon, but instead it's in CGI live action, and it's just awkward. And the most George Lucas sequence involved, I haven't put up the spoiler tag yet, but it involved Rihanna dancing for our lead. This was the most Lucasian sequence if I can use that term, of the film, and then it would cut back to Cara Delevingne and this weird alien who wanted her to put on a dress. Which, by the way, was one of the only funny moments in the film, but it still felt very like Star Wars prequels. And, but yeah, I just thought the world building, the characters they meet, especially these three little annoying, like, gross-looking aliens who finish each other's sentences, that was straight out of the Star Wars prequels. And they follow Cara Delevingne's character. I don't remember her name in the movie. They follow Cara Delevingne's... Laureline. All right, I don't remember them saying that. They probably did.
Valerian and Laureline.
Very nice. So they follow Laureline around and they keep conning her, basically. Again, something very George Lucas. And the reason I keep defaulting to that is because I get that exact same vibe. I get that exact same, like, super corny and really stupid and, like, not witty at all. Like, this is just a big, dumb sci-fi adventure. Emphasis on the dumb. It's extremely dumb. And it's dumb in more ways than just the way it presents its worlds. One thing that really began to bother me, and this was the worst part of the film, or at least the worst part of the film in this respect, not overall, was the first big action set piece, where they're going through this sort of shanty town, and they just keep throwing just this new technology at your face. And if you think about it for 1 second, the technology has no rules and makes no sense. Like, Valerian has this box on his arm that when he puts it on, he is able to, like, transport an invisible version of himself to a different location. So he can be at, like, 2 places at once, but he controls the invisible version of himself from a distance, right? So he goes into this, like, deal, and he breaks up this deal, and then he begins to get chased by all of the sort of, the shady alien guys, and they're, like, hitting him, and he's getting physically hurt in the location from which he is being transported. So if they hit the invisible version of himself, it acts as though they really hit him. So here's my question. If he's walking around in a giant crowd of people as an invisible version of himself, will he knock into people? Will he have to, can he go through walls? And if he can't go through walls, then what if he's standing, like, in the original area, he's standing in this wide open space? Well, the weirdest part was, his invisible version of himself jumps over a table, and it cuts to the actual version of himself where in the real area he's jumping on top of a truck in order to jump on that table. So does this mean that if that truck weren't there, he would have walked through the table? It was just the stupidest thing. And when you think about it, this technology breaks this entire universe. Like, what if every military in this universe has this technology? There will just be invisible people with floating boxes walking around everywhere. I was so lost. And the movie continues like this. It constantly throws new technology at your face without ever establishing rules for that technology. Now, some of it, granted, makes more sense than others, but it just comes down to being a bunch of stuff on the screen. You know, that if you're not thinking, maybe it'll, like, come together, but, like, I just couldn't take it seriously in the slightest.
Yeah, and it's just the premise of this film, this city of 1,000 planets thing, where they're on this, like, it's like this super like spaceship.
I think it was supposed to be the space station that they sent off in the beginning, I think, as well.
Yeah. So it's like the super space station that encapsulates 1,000 different planets within it. Just that premise really sums this movie up very well, because there's just, like, all this shit jammed into this movie, and they don't know what they're doing. So I want to talk about just the overarching plot.
Okay, so should we put the spoiler tag up?
Yeah, maybe put the spoiler tag up.
Okay.
Because I know that all those people out there, all the listeners, they're going to want to go. They're going to want to watch Valerian. Don't want to get it spoiled. I feel you.
Oh, absolutely.
It's gripping. It's a gripping film. So the general plot to my memory, is basically, as I mentioned, you have this City of a Thousand Planets spaceship. There's some weird stuff going on, and there's a sector that no one's supposed to go to. You're not allowed to go there.
They say it's radioactive.
They say it's radioactive, and it turns out it's like encompassing like a civilization, right, or something.
It's the home base of those weird like pearlescent aliens from the opening,
from the beginning. Yeah,
where they're building a ship that will become their old planet.
And of course, because it's a campy, bad sci-fi movie, it's the government is the bad guy.
Of course.
The government that they trusted all along turns out to be the bad guy who's exploiting these things.
And can I just say, it's so blatantly obvious that that's what's going on. Like, it doesn't even try. It's like the whole, like, and I mean, I don't have anything against this plot line in itself because I've seen it done really well before, right? But you're right to point out that this is the sign of any bad sci-fi movie, is to do the whole government evil thing, because it allows the film, because, you know, sci-fis are supposed to have some kind of message, and it allows the film to have a message without, like, thinking.
Right. You get the environmental message, you get the anti-government message. I remember the climax of this movie was just so boring. They're like having a fist fight, basically, right?
Yeah. I mean, I will say the film got better for me at that part. I didn't think it was good, but I wasn't hating it. Like, I think the finale of the movie, from when we kind of have the reveal that it was the general all along, oh, surprise. And then the rest of the film from there was better than everything else, because for the first time, the movie had focus. I mean, honestly, like, sure, these pearlescent creatures were there throughout the course of the film, but honestly, a lot of this movie had nothing to do with them. And it just, you know, and I'm not against having very little plot in service of just doing creative, interesting, and fun things in the middle. Some of my favorite films do that, right? I'm not against that. But notice how I said creative and fun things. That's not what this movie... This movie has sequences where we watch Rihanna dance. Way too long. For way too long. And, you know, honestly, her character was actually kind of interesting. Kind of generic, but kind of interesting. Like, this sort of like alien that could become anything it wanted and could shapeshift, and it was forced into this almost sort of sex slavery in this like paradise area where it seems like that's kind of everybody. Again, not a theme that's heavily explored, but it's kind of there because sci-fi movies do that, right? But anyway, like, her character was okay, but then she just dies, like, a scene later. and they make her death scene this, like, super sad moment when it's like, I barely knew this character. I saw her dance in a maid outfit.
But it was sad. It was sad to learn that was actually Rihanna. And we've lost Rihanna.
That's true, yeah. I miss Rihanna.
Yeah.
But
so I want to talk about my favorite part of this film.
Okay.
And you touched on it a little bit. So, okay, from what I remember, they kind of go on the run, right? And they get split up. Cara Delevingne's character gets captured by this. I guess you would call them aliens.
Yeah, they were
these like
George Lucas creations. That's what they are.
Yeah, very very George Lucas creations. And so basically, they are trying to get her to pretty herself up because they're going to feed her to the king. This has to be one of the most bizarre sequences I've ever seen. So it's this... They're just shuffling stuff to this gluttonous king, and nothing they're giving him is good enough. And so they're going to give him Laureline. He's going to eat Laureline.
No, he's going to eat the top portion of her head.
Yes.
Specifically, he has a tool that is. Think about this. This guy has a tool that specifically chops off the top portion of a head, and the head would have to be a certain shape. So you have to assume it's human heads.
And so there's basically this conga line getting up to the king. Valerian and the shapeshifter like merge into one to sneak in.
Yeah.
From what I remember, it's been a while since I've seen this, but from what I remember, what really got me about this scene was obviously Valerian like springs into action and there's like chaos or whatever. The way they kill the king is like weird and kind of gruesome. From what I remember, don't they like behead him?
One of them, I don't remember who does it. They chop off his head in the same region that they were going to cut off Loreline's like top portion of her head, and you see it like slide off for like a moment. Yeah.
It doesn't end up on a platter. Funny gag.
It may have. I was so checked out during this stupid shit.
It's really just the stupidest thing you can imagine.
It was extremely it was extremely Lucas again. It was yeah. Man.
I will say this about the film. The only thing I enjoyed about this film is at times it did look very pretty.
At certain points, absolutely.
You mentioned it before, but there was some good practical effects. There was some good CG.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Generally, all of the locations they went to looked different. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just this like gray mess. There was some color but besides that, this movie was just a train wreck.
Even visually, I'm going to take the spoiler tag down for right now, so just take note of that. Even visually, I had issues. So, you know, on the set design angle, all of the worlds were fine, but they never felt unique or very creative. Like, there was a world that just involved a bunch of advertisements, and it was just trying to be Blade Runner. But, like, not good. It was just a cluster of ads, and it didn't seem like there was much purpose to it. It was just, sci-fi movies are anti-capitalist sometimes, right? Okay, let's do that too. That's what I felt like this movie was just like the person sci-fi movies do this, right? And then it's in the movie because that's what sci-fi does. And the further evidence of this is that everything else is so just mind-numbingly incompetent, like the casting on the two leads here, which I cannot stress enough how awful of a choice these two actors were for these roles. And I'm not even trying to slight them as actors. They were just clearly not right for these roles.
Yeah, no, I want to double down on that because the reason why, I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, like, this movie was a mess.
Yeah.
But it was like fine if you took the main characters out.
Basically.
Because these two are seriously two of the most just unlikable every time they were on the screen, which was, by the way, all the time because they were the main characters.
Yeah,
I hated every second of it.
Yeah.
Because they and you can kind of see their face in the poster here you have up. That is literally their face and their attitude the whole freaking movie.
Oh, but Steven, you forget the part where Cara Delevingne says, "Love is the most powerful force in the universe," and blah 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 blah. That's right. Yes. That's right, everyone. They did, in fact, do that. That did end up being the central theme of the film, is that love conquers all. And she basically says this to the camera. She may have has fucking winked to the camera. Let's be real here.
I wouldn't have been surprised if she did. We just didn't catch it, honestly.
Maybe. Oh my god. There's a lot of stuff that confused me. Again, I do want to point, the tech thing is big because that one action scene involving some of the tech just made no sense and had no rules. Now, thankfully, the tech in the rest of the film wasn't quite as bad. Although it was kind of weird. Like, there's one scene where these pearlescent creatures come in. They have these guns that shoot blue goop over everybody and kind of freezes them. It doesn't kill them. Well, right before Valerian gets this blue goop shot at him, he decides to stick this tube in his mouth and that he bites onto. And then when the goo is over him, the tube becomes a little spider and it cuts through the goo. And I'm wondering what the other uses of this technology are. Is this its only use? Does he have a device that cuts through thick goop in the event that somebody shoots goop onto him? Because if that's the case, I'm wondering how many other enemies would choose to use this tactic, seeing as their tactic would probably be to kill you, and the pearlescent creatures were one of the only ones who were, like, not trying to kill anyone. So just in general, I'm confused by a lot of that, and you can say it's nitpicky, and, you know, in that case it definitely is, but I'm making a greater point that the tech in this movie made no sense, and that is definitely not a nitpick. It outright ruined the first action scene here, where I just could not believe a thing that was happening. And I guess I think that's a good way to sum up the film, too, because I was never invested in anything that was happening, ever. It was, if it wasn't outwardly annoying and just utterly unlikable, it was just generic and boring.
Yes, just the pits. So I should have mentioned this at the top, but I'll mention it here. This is actually based off of a very famous collection of comic books that ran for a lot of years in France, and has inspired a lot of sci-fi, even here in the U.S. That's just a little thing to note.
Which I did actually mean to say, because I was aware of that. I did mean to say at the beginning that any critiques I have of this story, if these are also contained within the graphic novels, I'm not making any comment on how they were presented there, because I don't know. Like, maybe if in those comics he has this box that transports him to other places, maybe it establishes rules for that in the comics, right? I have no clue.
Yeah, and maybe they're, like, actually likable characters.
Yeah,
Who knows?
Yeah.
I would certainly hope so, because they're not here.
Not at all. And that's
I
all.
hope the only thing that comic fleshes out is that series of 3 little aliens that finish each other's sentences.
Yeah.
And I hope Rihanna's in there too.
Definitely. I hope specifically Rihanna. In fact, I hope her name isn't Bobo. I hope it's Rihanna.
Hello, it is I, Rihanna.
Anyway, I'm actually done. I can move on to the ending. Are you good? Do you have anything last to say?
Nope.
All right. Well, would I recommend this? No. I give this I'll say 3.5 out of 10. That's what I'll say. And I think this movie's pretty terrible. I really, again, visually, I think there's actually a lot of creativity. In fact, there were even some shots that I thought were cleverly framed in an interesting thematic way. The director here clearly has a level of talent. The cinematographers have a level of talent. The graphic designers, or I should say the CG artists, have a lot of talent, despite it occasionally looking uncanny. In some ways, it is creative. In other ways, it just borrows from everything it's ever seen. Although I don't ever find that creativity to really pay off. And of course, the 2 leads are so horribly unlikable that no matter how good everything else was, I don't think I could have given this anything above a 5. Like, with characters who are this hateable, it just, there's no way to look past it, sadly. You know? Unless they just shut up, I guess, but they don't. There may have been a scene here or there, an idea here or there that I enjoyed, but just overall, this thing was just an absolute slog, and I did not enjoy it.
Yeah, and I also would not recommend this. I give this probably about a 2. I just remember I saw this in theaters, and boy, was that a mistake.
Not many people did, I don't think.
Because I want to stress that this is not bad, like, oh man, it's so bad it's like an enjoyable watch.
No,
this is just bad.
Yeah, this is just bad. Don't watch it.
It is boring and unlikable.
Yeah.
Just the worst.
And I think that's all we have to say, so I think we can move on. Yeah?
Yep.
All right. So I recommended Steven an album by the PC music artist SOPHIE. This album came out this year. It's called Oil of Every Pearl's Uninsides. And I don't know that. Oh, shit. Anyway, you can start.
We have a very an unintentionally themed episode today because both of these are very recent recommendations.
Yeah.
Valerian came out last year. This came out this year.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to note that because I had thought about that as I was listening to this. Okay. So
Say the thing you always say first, Stephen.
my catchphrase.
Yeah, say it.
This is an album. Was that it? Was that my catchphrase?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, I got it in one, guys. I want to start on this one talking about, and this is very recent, right? Like, didn't this just come out within like the last like couple of months?
June, I think. Pretty sure it was.
Wow, yeah, that's like last month. Nice. Mm-hmm. So this is hot on the SEO press, let me tell you.
Hell yeah.
This is a very short album. I was actually surprised by how short this thing was. Very, very breezy too. I mean,
it's 40 minutes. It's kind of standard.
Yeah, I guess the short in its track list.
Right.
Some tracks are definitely longer than an average track, but only 9 tracks on the set list. So I think what you wanted me to say was I have not heard of this person before.
Yes, that is what I wanted you to say. Thank you.
But guess what? I have actually.
Oh wow, really?
Heard of this person.
That's
before.
very nice.
That's very good. What a twist.
Yeah, I guess Sophie's been on your radar. I don't.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I had heard of her.
Well,
before.
she does. She has done production for artists like Charlie XCX and some other big names actually. Although whenever she's done that, it's been because those artists wanted to go weird.
And that's a good place to start. So this is very weird. I would say actually. So just going through the track listings, a lot of the tracks actually reminded me a lot of like an Annie Lennox kind of sound, especially the first track. It's Okay to Cry. My first listen through, I was like, man, this really reminds me of like solo Annie Lennox. That kind of very ethereal, sort of droning lyric, slow lyric. The one thing I'll ask you, because I don't know if this is something, because this stuck out to me, and it's very minor, and I think it might be more a function of how I listen to it, but I feel like the mix on this track was odd. Like, I had to turn this track way up to be able to hear.
It's very quiet.
It's very quiet.
Only the very end is anywhere in the range of the rest of the album, and even then, it's really not.
Yeah, and I would assume so if that's not just the way I listened to it, then I would assume it was obviously an artistic decision. Absolutely. But at the same time, it was like, it almost felt like when I started listening to it, it was broken because of how quiet it was.
Very quiet, yes.
I like really had to turn this thing up to be able to hear it. But so starts off with this, I wouldn't say a commercial sound, but like I mentioned, something that I had heard before and something that I was familiar with. And then and then immediately it switches places.
Yeah, Stephen was thinking, wow, Lewis actually recommended me something accessible for never mind.
For once I was like, man, this is maybe an actual thing, but no, it was not an actual thing.
That's actually part of the reason why
immediate switcheroo going into Pony Boy. So I will talk generally about a lot of the tracks here. Very mechanical is kind of how I would describe it. Almost. So I would say very electronic.
Industrial. It's industrial.
And industrial.
Yeah.
And you hear that almost immediate. You don't hear that in It's Okay to Cry almost at all. And then in Pony Boy, it's like boom, right in your face.
Yeah.
Industrial, and a lot of the times, a lot of the noises are very blown out.
Yes.
And so that comes out quite a bit in a lot of these tracks. I would say generally I would classify this thing as a pop album, and very avant-garde, but a pop album, and almost to the point where I felt like a couple of the tracks here were kind of deconstructions of like 80s, early 90s pop. So you get some like
Immaterial.
So stuff like Immaterial, Infatuation, even a little bit Pony Boy, and then you have some tracks that are very, like I mentioned, kind of that Annie Lennox sound. So It's Okay to Cry, Is It Cold in the Water? But all of those things blend very well. All of this undermined by this very industrial, blown out, like almost at times hard to listen to, just like clanging of machinery.
A lot of noise elements too.
A lot of noise elements.
On Pony Boy, like at the end of each like rhythmic phrase, there's just this sharp like squeal of noise. Especially on the final track here, Whole New World, there's a lot of that. Which is probably the weirdest, definitely the weirdest track on the record.
Yeah, and the longest track.
Yeah.
And they utilize a lot of, or she utilizes a lot of sounds that are taken from certain things. So for instance, in one track, there's a motorcycle that revs and for quite a while, actually, from what I remember.
I think you're talking about the end of Pretending.
Yeah, you're kind of listening to a motorcycle for quite a while.
Yeah,
and there's stuff like that and that are in quite a number of these tracks that I thought was definitely interesting and added a different element. I think what's most interesting about this album to me is it's like some of these tracks do sound like they could be radio hits. I think a lot of this is kind of that new wave of dance music. I mean, you mentioned it. She's worked with artists like Charlie XCX and others. And some of these tracks I could definitely see like within some circuits like getting some popularity.
Some.
Not all of this album.
Some.
Most of this album is very avant-garde.
Well, okay, so I'll jump in here and point something out. So, the one thing you haven't mentioned about the record, and something that, in my opinion, is its weakest point, is the album's flow. So on this record, you've got a mixture between basically these industrial bangers set up against ambient pop, essentially. I mean, tracks like Infatuation, It's Okay to Cry, these are like ambient pop tracks. Maybe like art pop, or whatever you want to call it. But it's a lot of ambient as well. In fact, there's just a straight up ambient piece on the record. And so these two sounds, it's not like they don't work together, because I actually think the transition from It's Okay to Cry into Pony Boy is just amazing. Like, it was a fantastic idea. And to your point about It's Okay to Cry being quiet, I think it's very clear that was an intentional decision, because right after this song, Pony Boy just comes in just fucking blaring, and it's like I think that sets you up for the record in a really cool way. Although I will agree that, like, I think during the bridge of It's Okay to Cry, I can't even hear it. So it's a bit of an issue, but still, it's a really cool artistic decision. And then the issue is that I don't feel like Sophie did a great job of structuring this throughout the whole record, because after Pony Boy, it goes straight into Face Shopping, which is another track just like it. And then you never get another track quite like those two tracks on the rest of the album. Like a Whole New World and Not Okay are in the same sort of genre, but they're not really the same sort of like banger kind of thing, because these tracks are like fucking, ooh, damn. They go fucking hard, whereas the other time she does this sound, it's more just like straight out in the fucking left field weird direction. And the issue is that after Face Shopping, you get into like basically all of the ambient pop tracks like in a row, only separated by Not Okay, which is really just a brief interlude. And I kind of wish that maybe she had spaced that out a little bit more. Like maybe Pony Boy goes into Is It Cold in the Water? Maybe that goes into Infatuation, which then goes into Face Shopping. You know what I mean? Something to break it up, because I do feel like when you get to the ambient pop section of the record, it's like this is the ambient pop part, this is the industrial part. I kind of wish it were spaced out a little bit more. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I could agree with that, especially with if I look at this album, like Immaterial's placement as well, because you do have such a long stretch of this ambient pop, and then you even have an ambient track, and then you kind of get into like Immaterial, and then what is the weirdest track of the album and the longest track of the album, Whole New World.
Well, I do like that those two were placed back to back, but I wish maybe Immaterial could have come after Face Shopping or something, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. But one thing I want to point out about this record, a lot of people have been mentioning, is the themes of the record. This record is very much tied into Sophie's identity as a trans woman. And I think that what's really fascinating is if you read into the lyrics on the record, of which there aren't many, actually. Like, the tracks that have a lot of lyrics are tracks like Pony Boy, really, is like the one that I can think has the most lyrics in it. Other than that,
it's a lot of just like A B B A.
Yeah,
B.
Well, the thing is, in that track, it's like the lyrics are super distorted, but if you read them, they are extremely like gritty sexual stuff. Like, it is just one of the dirtiest tracks I have ever heard. It's nuts. That track's like a BDSM banger, I guess. But the thing is, the way she structured this record is almost as though you are going through her transition. You know, you begin with "It's Okay to Cry," where you know, it's almost like she's talking to herself, you know, it's okay to cry sometimes. You go into Pony Boy, which is just this fucking sex anthem. But right after that, you hit Face Shopping, where she's saying, you know, my face is the front of shop. I'm real when I shop my face. Pointing out the point, you know, all of this plastic surgery, Photoshop, all of these kinds of things. She feels as though she is pretending, which comes into the track Pretending, which has no lyrics, but I think given the placement on the record as well as the sonics of the track, it still, you can tell exactly what the thematic element in this track is, and it's extremely powerful for that reason. However, after Pretending, you get Immaterial, which, can I just say, and you may agree, it's just such a joyous, like, it is such a joyous celebration towards the end of this record. I can be anything I want. I can be, and like, that's the core theme of the record, and it's just beautiful. It's wonderful. It is such a great finish to the thematic shift of this album as Sophie is figuring herself out. But then, in an almost crushing way, Whole New World is like she's questioning this. And notice it's not just called Whole New World, it's Whole New World / Pretend World. And as the track ends, as it keeps going, it goes from being super, super gritty. And there are points in this track where I was just absolutely blown away by how fucking nuts it was. You've got these children's vocals shouting Whole New World in between these just stabs of like electricity, it sounds like. It's fucking crazy. But as the song transitions into, I guess, what is supposed to be the Pretend World section, it begins to like become this really cloudy and atmospheric ambient piece towards the end as it just kind of fades out. And what I think is really cool about that is it leaves you wondering what Sophie is trying to, where Sophie is trying to say she is now after Immaterial. And I don't know if you picked up on these themes, but I loved the way that it was almost a narrative progression throughout the record.
Yeah, that's interesting. I did not pick up on that, but that is, that is a pretty cool thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, in a track like "Is It Cold in the Water" is almost tear-jerking, honestly. I thought that track was great. And I love the metaphor there, you know? Like, it's a new environment she's now stepping into. And again, it's placed after Face Shopping, when you could almost say she's like beginning that work. Yeah, I think it's brilliant in that angle as like a concept album.
Yeah. And this is kind of the debut album.
Yes.
Right?
She released a number of a number of singles that caught people's ear. Like in 2015, I believe, in 2014. Like Lemonade, Hard, Bip. a couple tracks like that, and she came out with the compilation album called Product, which was basically just a compilation of all those singles, which at the time was basically like her debut, but again, it wasn't a studio album. This is her first debut studio album.
I will say the production on this album is incredible.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I mean, to be able to create these sounds and blend these sounds to make something on this album is just insane to me, because when you're listening to this, I mean, it is clearly artistically constructed in a very meaningful and very specific way. And especially when you're listening to some of these tracks, as I mentioned, where it's just like everything is super blown out to a lot of times to the point where it's like uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But not uncomfortable in such a way where it's like you can't be listening to it.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Interesting.
I wouldn't say that. Besides Whole New World, which I think is really left field, I wouldn't say that anything here is so inaccessible to the point where I think it's like necessarily hard to get into. I think it's difficult because tracks like Ponyboy and Face Shopping are definitely kind of terrifying, and that's going to freak a lot of people out. However, the rhythmic elements in a way could be compared to just like extremely blown. It's extremely blown out, but it isn't too dissimilar to the kinds of beats that you're getting in even popular music. It's just that it's noisier, it's grittier, but besides Whole New World, and a lot of this album is very pleasant too. It's the ambient pop stuff is, it's on the more inaccessible end of pop because many people would find it boring. Many pop listeners would find it boring, but still, it's a pleasant sonic feel, like on a track like It's Okay to Cry and Infatuation and stuff like that. One thing I want to point to when you talk about the sound design is the track Pretending, which is the ambient piece on this album, which really stands out to me on that level. One of my favorite tracks here. The way that this piece just comes alive, like this thing gets so all-encompassing. It gets so overwhelming towards the end of this ambient piece because the entire time these sounds are building on each other and it sounds enormous. And at the end of the track, you're getting these like rushed and high-pitched vocal samples kind of rushing in from ear to ear, and it gets kind of like I found it to be extremely powerful. Probably the most powerful song on the record in an odd way. Almost reminded me of like an ambient piece you'd get on like Swans' soundtracks for the blind. To anybody in my audience who'd be familiar with that, I found it to be similar to some of that kind of stuff. I don't know if the ambient piece stood out to you any, but I loved it. Oh, come on.
Yeah, I think it probably says something about me that my favorite tracks on this album were the ones that were most akin to pop, but that doesn't mean I didn't appreciate what was being done in those ambient tracks and in some of the weirder tracks that are on here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else I have to say, so I think that if you're done, we can...
Yeah, so to wrap this up, I quite enjoyed this. I think that this is definitely listenable for pretty much anyone, I would say. This is out there, and this is out there and weird, but it's not so much to where I would say that like you wouldn't be able to listen to it. I'm obviously comparing this again to the Trial Mask replica.
Yeah, exactly.
That's probably as far as it goes.
Your meter's been shifted a little to the left.
Yeah. So for me, I think I'd probably give this somewhere around an 8, maybe a little lower than that, maybe like a 7.5 and an 8, somewhere around there. I think that I really enjoyed listening to all these tracks. I think that there's a lot of good stuff going on here. I'm curious to see where she goes next. But like there were definitely some tracks that I kind of started to zone out on.
Yeah.
Whole New World is really long. And as you mentioned too, like once you get to all of those ambient tracks back to back to back, it's hard to stay in the like what they're pulling together, what she is pulling together here. So for that reason, like I said, probably about maybe like a 7.5, an 8, somewhere around there.
Yeah, that's fair. Again, I'd recommend this thing. I think Steven's right that anybody could listen to this. I think there are going to be a lot of people who will hear this and with some of these tracks here just hate them and not understand them in any way whatsoever. However, because the album balances itself out, I think even these people will have something to be here for, you know? And I think that because it's separated with these pop tracks, it may give you more of a grounding more of a foundation to understand the more noisy tracks. Right, which I'm sure is probably why you maybe were able to get with him a little more too, is because it's not just a bunch of these industrial, noisy, just fucking crazy shit. It's a little bit of that, and then it's a good amount of pleasant stuff too to balance it out. However, as I pointed out, I don't think that balance is struck in the way that I would have liked, and I think that it almost seems as though Sophie were like, as she was making this album, had certain interests in certain things at certain times. Like, in the beginning, she wanted to make all these industrial tracks, but then she made Is It Cold in the Water and wanted to make a bunch of songs like that and just kind of stuck them all back to back. Like, that's the impression I get. So I think it could have used better structuring. But besides that, I really loved this. And I think that tracks like Pony Boy, Face Shopping, Whole New World, obviously those were my favorites. But I did really love Immaterial, Pretending. The only track I don't think I cared for too much was like Infatuation and Not Okay. I don't think either of those were fantastic. But other than that, this is a great project. I love the narrative elements here. I love the incredible production on this. And the bubblegum bass kind of stuff on like Immaterial, where it's like pop, but it's like pop blown out to all of its most insane cliches, to the point where it's still a little oddball, you know. That being said, perfectly listenable, wondrous, joyous track. I loved it. So I give it like an 8.5, I think. And yes, I would absolutely recommend it. And I can't wait to see what Sophie does next. I think that since one of my main issues here was just album structuring, that's not a very hard thing to fix. And I think that she could come up with like a fucking Cold Stone classic. Like, honestly, I think she's going in that direction. And one last thing I want to point out that you may not have mentioned. Did you catch what the album title means?
No.
If you say it really fast, it sounds like I love every person's insides.
Oh. Interesting.
So I thought that was clever, yeah. And that'll have to do it for that, I suppose, right? I think we can move on to the Recs.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Steven, you go first. Buddy pal. Brother.
Okay. So. My rec to you.
This setup sounds kind of intimidating.
Honestly, this is more a peek behind the curtain. This one is more selfish than anything. But what I'm going to rec to you is I am going to rec to you Because the Internet by Childish Gambino.
Okay.
Because the Internet is an album by, as I mentioned, Childish Gambino. Came out in 2013. I would say personally, I think it's probably its most famous album to date. It's the one that most of the singles that most people would know from old Donald Glover come from. So because of that, that's kind of how I see it. Not to say that I would necessarily suggest that the other ones aren't as famous or famous, but I would say that this is probably his most popular. Okay, yeah. Okay. So with that's my recommendation.
And isn't it a mixtape specifically? Because I thought it was a mixtape. Not that it matters, but
mixtape.
Yeah,
whatever you want to call it.
It literally the difference between an album and a mixtape is utterly meaningless nowadays. So it doesn't even matter. All right, well, I take your recommendation, and Steven, to you, I'm going to recommend the Season 1 premiere and Season 1 finale, as well as the Season 2 premiere and Season 2 finale of My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic.
Okay.
And that is my rec.
Well, what an episode we will have for everyone next week. Sorry, I should say 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks, that's right. Steven, you can't get the schedule wrong. We have been working very hard to stay on schedule.
We have someone chiming in from our chat, by the way, saying that it is a studio album because of the internet.
Is it, though?
So anyway, yep. So as Lewis mentioned, we're going to try to stay to our schedule. So in 2 weeks from now, Monday, 8 Eastern Standard Time, 5 Pacific, we will be back and we will be discussing Because the Internet and My Little Pony. Thank you again, everyone, for listening. It's been so much fun doing these for now 14 episodes.
Yeah, and we're about to hit the 1.5. That's a big mark.
Yeah. Basically, every episode for us is a milestone.
I've been treating every episode like a milestone. I'm glad you finally noticed.
Yeah.
The big 1.5.
Because every time we get together to do this, it's just so much fun.
It is.
So with that, I don't think I have any housekeeping things for this time. Do you have anything?
No. I don't.
Okay. Well, those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Get wrecked.